Sometimes the ones who wait the longest are the ones who know the truth. The boy's voice barely carried across the parking lot, thin as the cold wind that slipped between the squad cars, his small hands gripping the worn leash like it was the last thread holding his world together. "Sir, can you buy my dad's police dog?" Officer Nathan Cole stood still for a moment, his breath fogging in the late afternoon air, the fading sunlight stretching long shadows across the concrete. And for a second he said nothing, because he had learned long ago that the hardest questions were never loud. They came quietly, like this, from someone who had already lost too much. The German shepherd beside the boy stood tall despite the tension in the leash, his coat a muted blend of gray and cream, his amber eyes fixed not on the boy, but on Nathan, as if measuring him, as if remembering something deeper than the moment. Nathan shifted his weight, the familiar creak of his duty belt grounding him. "Kid, that's not how it works," he said gently, though his voice carried the tired edge of a man who had spent too many years saying no to things he once believed in. The boy swallowed, nodding like he had expected that answer. But he didn't move, didn't leave, just looked down at the dog and whispered, "He won't eat. He just waits by the door every night." The wind stirred again, brushing past them, carrying the faint scent of pine and asphalt. And that's when the dog's ears snapped upright, sharp, focused, his body going still in a way that made something in Nathan tighten, because trained K9s didn't react without reason. The dog let out a low, controlled sound, not quite a bark, not quite a growl, something older, instinctive. Then suddenly he pulled forward, hard, the leash jerking in the boy's hands. Nathan stepped forward on reflex, reaching out. Easy, but the dog didn't stop, his gaze locked somewhere beyond the edge of the lot, past the quiet road, toward a line of trees that swayed gently in the distance. Then came the sound, 3 sharp barks, evenly spaced, deliberate, the kind of signal no handler ever forgot. Nathan's pulse slowed, not from calm, but from recognition. He had heard that pattern before, not often, but enough to know it meant one thing. Something wasn't right. The boy looked up, confused. He only does that when. He trailed off, uncertainty clouding his voice. Nathan crouched slightly, his eyes narrowing toward the direction the dog was pointing. The world seemed to quiet around them, even the distant hum of traffic fading into something softer. Like the air itself was listening. The dog pulled again, stronger this time, as if whatever lay ahead wasn't just important, it was urgent, and Nathan felt it then. That shift he hadn't felt in years, the one that came before everything changed. He exhaled slowly, his hand closing around the leash just above the boy's grip. "All right," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's see what he's trying to tell us." And somewhere in that moment, without anyone saying it out loud, the decision had already been made, not just to follow the dog, but to follow whatever truth had been waiting, longer than any of them realized. The gravel crunched softly beneath their feet as they crossed the edge of the parking lot, the late sun dipping lower behind the trees and turning the sky into a muted wash of gold and gray. The German shepherd moved with purpose, his stride steady and unhesitating. As if he had walked this path 100 times before, Nathan kept a firm grip on the leash now, feeling the strength in the dog's pull, not wild, not panicked, but focused, intentional, the kind of movement that spoke of training. Layered over instinct, the boy followed close, his small boots struggling to keep pace, his breath quick and uneven. "He has never done this before," he said quietly, almost to himself. Nathan did not answer right away, his eyes scanning the surroundings, the quiet road, the shallow ditch running alongside it, the line of pines stretching out ahead like a boundary between what was known and what was not. The air carried a faint chill, and with it came a silence that felt heavier the farther they walked, the kind of silence that made every small sound sharper, the rustle of dry leaves, the distant hum of a passing truck, the soft jingle of the dog's collar. Then, suddenly the dog slowed, his body lowering slightly, muscles tightening as if he had reached something unseen. He stepped off the pavement and into the grass, nose close to the ground, moving in short, deliberate arcs. Nathan followed, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. He could feel it now, that subtle shift, the one that came when a place held something more than just empty space. The boy stopped a few feet behind them, watching, his hands clasped tightly together. "This is where," They said it happened. He whispered, his voice carrying a quiet uncertainty. Like a memory he was not sure he trusted. Nathan glanced back at him briefly, then returned his focus to the dog. The shepherd had begun to dig, not wildly, but with controlled urgency, each movement precise, as if uncovering something he already knew was there. The sound of claws scraping against soil filled the air, steady and rhythmic, until a faint metallic note broke through, soft but unmistakable. Nathan felt his breath catch slightly as he crouched down, brushing away the loose dirt with his gloved hand. The shape emerged slowly, a piece of metal dulled by time, but still holding its form. He lifted it carefully, turning it just enough for the fading light to catch the surface. And there it was, a police badge, worn, scratched, but clear, the number still visible beneath the dirt. The boy stepped closer, his eyes widening as recognition settled in. "That is my dad's," he said, barely above a whisper. Nathan's jaw tightened slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of what that meant, because badges were not things that simply disappeared, not from a case that had already been closed. The dog let out a low sound, not aggressive, not afraid, but insistent, his gaze fixed on the ground where the badge had been, then shifting just slightly, a few inches to the left, as if pointing to something more, something still hidden. Nathan followed that gaze, his instincts aligning with the silent message. Whatever had been found was not the end of the story, it was the beginning. And as the wind moved gently through the trees above them, carrying a soft whisper through the branches, it felt less like they had discovered something lost, and more like something had been waiting, patiently, to finally be seen. The wind shifted slightly, brushing past the trees with a low whisper that seemed to carry something unfinished. Nathan remained crouched, the cold metal of the badge resting in his palm as he studied it more closely, the edges worn but deliberate, not lost by accident, but left behind. The dog stood rigid beside him, his ears angled forward, his gaze locked not on Nathan, not on the boy, but on that same patch of ground just inches away. And then he moved again, slower this time, pressing his paw firmly against the soil as if marking a point that could not be ignored. Nathan followed the motion carefully, setting the badge down beside him as he brushed away more dirt. The ground here felt different, slightly compacted, like it had been disturbed once, and then left to settle. The boy stepped closer, his voice small but steady. "He used to say Rex could find anything." Nathan nodded faintly, his focus unbroken, because this was no longer about what they thought they knew. It was about what had been missed. His fingers uncovered a second object, smaller, darker, wrapped in a thin layer of moisture from the earth. He lifted it slowly, revealing a compact recording device, its surface scratched but intact, the kind issued standard to field officers. Nathan turned it over, his thumb brushing across the side where a small indicator light blinked faintly. Still alive after all this time. A quiet breath escaped him, not in surprise, but in recognition, the kind that comes when pieces begin to fall into place. The boy leaned in, eyes fixed on the device. "What is it?" he asked. Nathan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered honestly. "Something your dad wanted someone to find." The dog let out a soft sound, almost a release, his body lowering slightly, as if the urgency that had driven him here was beginning to ease. But his eyes never left the device. Nathan pressed the button gently, and for a moment there was nothing, just the faint hum of static, blending with the rustle of leaves overhead. Then a voice emerged, quiet, steady, unmistakably human, carrying the calm tone of someone trained to stay composed even when the world shifted around them. The boy's breath caught, his shoulders stiffening as he recognized it instantly. It was his father, not loud, not dramatic, just present, speaking in measured words that felt less like a report and more like a message left for the right moment. Nathan did not interrupt, did not move. He simply listened. The recording spoke of something incomplete, something that did not match what had been written in the official report, details that had been overlooked or perhaps never fully understood. And as the voice continued, the air around them seemed to grow still, like the world itself was leaning in. The dog sat down slowly, his posture calm now, his tail resting against the ground, as if he had carried this moment for a long time and was finally setting it down. Nathan glanced at the boy, whose eyes shimmered not with confusion, but with something deeper, something closer to clarity. And in that quiet space between words and wind, it became clear that this was not just a discovery. It was a beginning, because some truths do not disappear when they are buried. They wait, patient and steady, until someone is willing to listen. The recording faded into silence, but the echo of that steady voice lingered in the air, as if it had never truly left. Nathan remained still for a moment, the small device resting in his hand, his mind moving through the words he had just heard, not as a stranger to them, but as someone who understood what it meant to leave something unfinished behind. The boy stood beside him, quiet now, his earlier uncertainty replaced by a fragile kind of focus, like someone beginning to see a picture that had always been there, but never fully clear. The dog exhaled softly, his posture relaxed but attentive, his eyes shifting between Nathan and the ground, as if reminding them that there was still more to uncover. Nathan glanced down at the badge again, then back at the device, the two objects side by side, telling a story that did not align with what had been written months ago, and that misalignment settled into him with a quiet weight. Not heavy, but undeniable. He rose slowly to his feet, brushing the dirt from his hands, his gaze drifting toward the line of trees ahead, the light now dimmer, the shadows stretching longer. "Your father was trying to say something," he said gently, his voice calm but certain. The boy nodded, his fingers tightening slightly around the edge of his jacket. "He would not just leave things like that," he replied, and there was no doubt in his tone. Only trust, the kind built over years of knowing someone's habits, someone's silence. Nathan gave a small nod, because he recognized that kind of certainty, the kind that did not need proof to exist, only time. The dog stood and took a few slow steps forward, then paused, turning his head just enough to look back at them, not impatient, not urgent, just waiting, as if asking a simple question without words. "Are you ready to follow?" Nathan stepped forward without hesitation this time, the decision already settled somewhere deeper than logic. They moved past the ditch and into the narrow stretch of trees, the ground softer here, covered in pine needles that muted their footsteps, the air cooler, carrying the faint scent of earth and something older, something that had been undisturbed for a long time. The dog led them in a straight line, no wandering, no uncertainty, until he slowed again near a cluster of rocks partially hidden beneath low branches. He stopped there, standing tall, his gaze fixed on the space between them. Nathan crouched. Once more, his movements deliberate, careful, as if respecting whatever lay beneath. He brushed aside the needles and leaves, revealing a shallow depression in the soil, not freshly made, but not entirely natural either. His hand hovered for a moment before pressing lightly against the ground, feeling the subtle difference in texture, the faint give that suggested something had been placed there, not by chance, but by intention. The boy knelt beside him, his voice barely more than a breath. "Do you think he knew someone would come back?" Nathan did not answer right away, his eyes steady on the spot before them. Then he spoke, quietly, almost thoughtfully. "I think he knew someone would listen." The dog lowered himself beside them, calm now, his presence steady and unwavering. And as the last light filtered through the branches above, casting soft patterns across the ground, it felt less like they were searching for something hidden, and more like they were being guided towards something that had been waiting all along, patient, silent, and ready to be understood. The soil gave way easier this time, as if it had already been loosened by time itself. Nathan pressed his fingers into the shallow depression and began clearing it with slow, careful movements, the kind that came not from urgency, but from respect. The boy stayed close beside him, watching every motion, his breath quiet, his presence steady, while the dog remained just inches away, his body still, his eyes never leaving the ground, as though he understood that whatever lay beneath mattered more than anything else in that moment. A few inches down, Nathan's hand brushed against something solid, not metal this time, but wood, aged and softened by years beneath the earth. He cleared around it gently, revealing a small box, no larger than a paperback book, its surface worn but intact, the edges slightly rounded from time. He lifted it slowly, the weight light but meaningful, as if it carried more than what could be seen. The boy leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Was this his?" Nathan studied the box for a moment before answering. "I think he meant for someone to find it." The dog shifted slightly, his tail giving a slow, single movement, not excitement, not relief, but recognition, as if this was the piece he had been leading them toward all along. Nathan opened the box carefully, the hinges creaking faintly, the sound soft against the quiet of the woods. Inside lay a folded map, edges yellowed, lines drawn in careful detail. Alongside it a small notebook, its cover scuffed but protected by the box that had kept it hidden. Nathan unfolded the map first, holding it up just enough to catch the last of the fading light. It showed the surrounding area, the road, the tree line, the ditch where they had started, but there were markings, small symbols circled in pen, paths traced with intention. And one location marked more heavily than the rest, deeper into the woods, beyond where most people would walk without reason. The boy's eyes followed the lines, his expression shifting as understanding slowly took shape. "He used to take Rex out here," he said quietly, said it helped him think. Nathan nodded slightly, his gaze moving to the notebook. He opened it with the same care, flipping through pages filled with steady handwriting. Notes that were not rushed, not careless, but deliberate. Observations, times, small details that might have seemed unimportant to anyone else, but clearly meant everything to the one who wrote them. And near the back, a final entry stood alone, written darker, as if pressed with more weight. Nathan read it silently at first, then aloud, his voice low and even. "If this is found, it means I ran out of time. Follow the map. Rex knows the way." The words settled into the space around them, simple, direct, but carrying a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. The boy looked at Nathan, something fragile and strong mixing in his expression. He trusted him. Nathan met his gaze, then glanced down at the dog, who now sat calmly, his posture steady, his eyes soft but focused, as if he had already known this moment would come. Nathan closed the notebook slowly, the weight of it now clearer than before. Not just evidence, not just a clue, but a message carried across time. And as the light faded further and the woods grew darker around them, it became clear that this was not the end of what had been hidden. It was only the path forward, waiting quietly, just beyond where they stood. The last light slipped behind the trees, leaving the woods wrapped in a quiet blue dusk that softened every edge and deepened every shadow. Nathan folded the map carefully and placed it back inside the box along with the notebook, not to hide it again, but to carry it forward with the same care it had been left behind. The boy stood close, his gaze moving between the map and the dog, as if trying to understand how something so silent could still guide them so clearly. "He said Rex always remembered paths better than people," he murmured, almost to himself. Nathan gave a small nod, his eyes shifting to the shepherd, who had already risen to his feet, his posture alert but calm, his head angled slightly toward the deeper stretch of woods where the marked location waited, not rushed, not anxious, just certain, as if time had never broken the connection between what was left and what needed to be found. Nathan stepped forward, the soft ground absorbing the sound of his boots. And without another word, they followed. The trees thickened as they moved deeper, branches arching overhead, filtering what little light remained into faint streaks that danced across the forest floor. The air cooled further, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, and with each step, the outside world seemed to fade just a little more, replaced by something quieter, something more focused, the kind of stillness that does not feel empty but expectant. The dog led without hesitation, weaving through the narrow spaces between trees, adjusting his path in subtle ways that Nathan recognized as intentional, not wandering, not searching, but remembering. They walked for what felt like several minutes, though time seemed less defined here, until the dog slowed again, near a fallen log partially covered in moss. He stopped, standing beside it, his gaze fixed on a spot just beyond. Nathan approached carefully, his movements steady, his senses tuned to the small details. The way the ground dipped slightly, the way the moss had been disturbed in a pattern too even to be natural. He crouched, brushing his hand across the surface, and beneath the soft layer of green, he felt it again, that subtle difference, the faint outline of something hidden just below. The boy knelt beside him, his voice quieter now, but stronger than before. "This is it, isn't it?" Nathan did not answer right away, not because he was unsure, but because some moments did not need to be rushed with words. He cleared the moss gently, revealing a flat wooden panel set into the ground. Almost invisible unless you knew where to look, the edges worn but intact. A small handle recessed into the surface. Nathan's hand hovered over it, the weight of everything they had found settling into that single point. The dog sat down beside them, his breathing slow and even, his presence no longer urging them forward, but holding them steady, as if he had brought them exactly where they needed to be, and now the choice to continue belonged to them. Nathan looked at the boy, who met his gaze with a quiet determination that had replaced the fear from earlier. Then he reached forward and wrapped his fingers around the handle, pausing for just a second, not out of hesitation, but out of understanding, because whatever lay beneath was not just a hidden place. It was the answer to a story that had waited long enough to be told. Nathan tightened his grip around the small recessed handle. The wood cool against his fingers as he pulled gently. At first nothing moved, as if the earth itself was reluctant to let go of what had been hidden. But then with a soft, worn creak, the panel lifted just enough to reveal a narrow opening beneath. A breath of colder air rising from below, carrying the faint scent of damp wood and thyme. The boy leaned closer instinctively, his eyes fixed on the dark space as if trying to see beyond what the fading light allowed. The dog remained still beside them, his posture calm, his ears forward, not alert in warning, but in quiet confirmation. Nathan lifted the panel further and set it aside carefully, revealing a small compartment carved into the ground, not deep, but deliberate. Inside rested a metal case, rectangular, its surface aged but protected, the edges lined with a thin seal that had kept it intact through seasons of rain and cold. Nathan reached down and lifted it out, the weight heavier than the wooden box from before, the kind of weight that suggested purpose, not storage. He set it on the ground between them and paused for a moment, his hand resting lightly on the lid, as if acknowledging the time it had spent waiting. The boy knelt closer, his voice quiet but steady. "He came back here, didn't he?" Nathan nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "Yes, and he wanted this to be found." The dog shifted slightly, lowering himself beside the case, his tail resting still against the ground, his breathing even, as if the urgency that had guided them had now transformed into something else, something quieter. Nathan opened the case carefully, the seal giving way with a soft release. Inside were neatly arranged items, not scattered, not rushed, but placed with intention. A stack of documents bound together, a second recording device, and a small folded photograph resting on top. Nathan picked up the photograph first, brushing away a thin layer of dust. It showed the boy's father standing beside Rex, both facing the camera. The dog alert, the man calm, his hand resting firmly on the dog's back, a partnership captured in a single still moment. The boy leaned in, his expression softening as he saw it, his fingers hovering just above the image without touching it. Nathan set the photo aside and lifted the documents next, flipping through pages filled with notes, reports, and markings that did not match what had been filed officially. Details that connected places, times, and observations into something more complete, something that had not been finished. The second recorder rested beneath them, and when Nathan picked it up, he noticed the small label etched onto its side. A date, recent compared to everything else. He pressed the button gently, and after a brief moment of static, the same steady voice returned, clearer this time, more direct, as if it had been meant for this exact moment. The words spoke of clarity, of knowing that something had been missed, and of trusting that the right person would follow the signs left behind. Nathan listened without interruption, his expression unchanged but his focus absolute. The boy stood beside him, his shoulders straighter now, as if the weight of not knowing had begun to lift, and when the recording ended, the woods felt different, not lighter, but clearer, like a path that had finally come into view. Nathan closed the case slowly, his hand resting on it for a brief moment. Then he looked at the boy and spoke quietly. "Your father did not leave this behind by accident." The boy nodded, his eyes steady, no longer searching for answers but ready to understand them, and beside them, the dog remained still, his presence no longer guiding them forward, but standing as quiet proof that some bonds do not fade, they lead. The forest held its breath as Nathan closed the metal case. the soft click of the latch sounding louder than it should have in the stillness around them. The boy stood beside him, his gaze steady now, no longer searching the ground, but looking ahead, as if something inside him had shifted from loss to understanding. The dog rose slowly, stretching his legs before stepping closer to Nathan, his amber eyes lifting to meet his, calm and unwavering, as if waiting for the next decision. Nathan exhaled quietly, the cool air brushing past his face. And for a moment he simply listened, not to the wind, not to the distant road, but to the silence that had followed the truth, because it was different now, not heavy, not uncertain, but clear. He picked up the case and stood, brushing the last traces of dirt from his gloves. "We are going back," he said, his voice low but certain. The boy nodded immediately, no hesitation, as if he had already known that this was not something meant to stay hidden any longer. They made their way back through the trees, the same path now feeling shorter, more defined, the dog walking beside them instead of ahead, his role no longer to lead, but to stay, to remain, as if the path forward no longer needed to be shown, only walked. When they reached the edge of the woods, the last light of dusk had settled into a deep blue, the parking lot empty now, quiet under the glow of distant streetlights. Nathan paused for a moment, looking out across the open space, then down at the case in his hand, the weight of it no longer just physical, but meaningful. He turned to the boy, his expression steady. "Your father left this because something did not match what they told you," he said, not as a question, but as a truth being placed gently into the open. The boy looked up at him, his voice soft but firm. He would not stop until it made sense. Nathan gave a small nod, because he understood that kind of man, the kind who followed a question until it became an answer. He glanced at the dog, who now stood close to the boy, his body angled protectively, yet calm, as if he had been waiting not just to lead them here, but to make sure they reached this point together. Nathan shifted his grip on the case, then looked back toward the station lights in the distance, a place of order, of reports, of records that sometimes told only part of a story. "Then we make it match," he said quietly, the words simple, but carrying a weight that settled into the air around them. The boy did not respond right away, but his shoulders straightened slightly, his posture changing, in a way that spoke of something returning, not the past, but a sense of direction. They walked together across the lot, their footsteps steady, the dog moving in quiet rhythm beside them. And as they reached the edge of the light, where shadow met the glow of the station beyond, it felt less like they were bringing something back, and more like they were finally ready to let it be seen. Because some truths are not meant to stay buried. They are meant to find their way home. The station lights hummed softly above them as they stepped inside, casting a steady glow across polished floors and quiet desks. The kind of place where everything was meant to be clear, documented, understood. Yet Nathan knew that sometimes clarity arrived late, carried not by reports, but by the things people refused to let disappear. He set the metal case down on the nearest desk with care, not as evidence alone, but as something that deserved to be opened in the light. The boy stood close beside him, his eyes moving across the room with a quiet awareness, as if this place now held a different meaning than before. The dog settled at his side, calm and grounded, his presence steady like an anchor that had finally found its place. Nathan opened the case once more, laying out the contents with deliberate precision, the photograph, the documents, the recorder, each piece forming a story that no longer felt incomplete. A fellow officer approached slowly, drawn by the quiet gravity of the moment, his expression shifting as Nathan explained, not in long sentences, but in clear, steady words, the kind that carried weight without needing emphasis. The room grew still as the recording played again, the voice filling the space not with urgency, but with certainty, and when it ended, there was no confusion left, only recognition, the kind that comes when something hidden finally aligns with what should have always been seen. The officer nodded slowly, understanding settling in, not as surprise, but as acceptance of a truth that had simply taken time to arrive. Nathan stepped back slightly, giving the moment room. The boy stood taller now, his shoulders no longer carrying the same weight as before, his gaze steady as it moved from the case to Nathan, then down to the dog, who looked back at him with quiet loyalty, unchanged, unwavering, as if nothing about this had ever been in doubt. Time passed in a way that felt both slow and certain. Decisions made, steps taken, not rushed, not forced, but guided by what had been uncovered. And when they finally stepped back outside, the night had settled fully, the air cooler, the sky clear and open above them. The boy looked up at Nathan, his voice soft but filled with something new, something lighter. He knew someone would finish it. Nathan looked down at him, then at the dog, who stood between them, steady as ever, and he gave a small nod. He knew someone would listen. The boy reached down, resting his hand gently against the dog's neck, not holding on tightly anymore, just present, just connected. The dog leaned slightly into the touch, calm and sure, and in that quiet moment, nothing felt missing anymore, not because everything had been replaced, but because what had been lost had found its way back in a different form. The wind moved softly through the street, brushing past them like a whisper that carried no weight, only peace. And as they stood there together, it became clear that some stories do not end when they are interrupted. They wait, patiently, until the right hands and the right hearts bring them home.